This is the story on how Nigel became such a colourful and interesting car. All of the cars that made this car up, all of the sacrifices, all of the dead cars beamed back to life in the form of Nigel. So, where do I start? The circumstances and the stories to be told about this car are already on video. They're at the beginning of this particular playlist where I tell you about why Nigel makes me happy. So there's not really a lot of point in going through that. So, what cars have gone into this? Let's count them up. Let's add up the cost. Let's do all of the figures. The first thing to be replaced on Nigel was actually a mirror, but that wasn't the start of this. I replaced the mirror because some lovely hooligan kicked it off in the middle of the night whilst walking past it, probably drunk. At the time, I didn't realise you could just replace the cap. As you can imagine, this is what Nigel used to look like. Having bought this car back for the third time, I realised I was kind of destined to keep it. I had to keep it. There was no way I couldn't do. And so hatched a little plan on how to make this little car something that stood out in the crowd. Rather bravely, I took the first step. It already had a Wedgwood blue mirror. The X-Power Grey ZR boot spoiler was the first thing I fitted. And this came free with the lockup. There was a variety of items left behind from the previous tenants of this particular lockup. And the ZR boot spoiler, along with the boots, was one of them. So we can safely say that cost me nothing. Next, I fitted a black filler flap. And this one isn't black, that one's green, so it's not the same one, obviously. Actually, the filler flaps have been one of those things I've swapped and changed quite a bit because it's just 3 screws to hold it in. It's rather simple. But then came the really brave part, fitting a black Streetwise door to Nigel. And this Streetwise door came off a Streetwise from my friend Dom, who gave it to me. He gave me the car because it ran out of MOT and it was broken and it was at the side of the road, causing stress and inconvenience to the neighbours that still could park their car next to it. Regardless, the easy option for this chap was just to let me take it away. And I did. And I say this was a brave move because it was the first time I'd ever felt really self-conscious about this car. Suddenly it had a black door on it. It looked like I was making an effort. Well, I was, just not the kind of effort you would have been expecting. The really curious thing though is that my friend Dom worked opposite to where I lived. So he got to see it every day, and he also got to hear his colleagues taking the mick. Much to the surprise of people around me and the embarrassment of my wife, I continued this little idea. I just didn't stop. I thought, I'll carry on. I'm actually going to do this rather bonkers, silly idea, no matter how stupid I actually think it looks. And quite genuinely, my opinion was it did look stupid. But the original thought behind this was to show off these parts. Sure, I've got them available. Anything that you see on this car is for sale. Anything at all. In fact, what I was going to do is just fit it full of all sorts of different random panels that made absolutely no sense and then have it sign written. But the spare money to have it sign written never really turned up, so that didn't happen. And that's a good thing. Soon after that, some real changes started to happen, such as the Wedgwood rear bumper. That came off a car somewhere near Stockport, or it could have been Stockport. Actually, I can't remember where it came from, but it's irrelevant. I bought an early 25 in Wedgwood, of course, and the head gasket had gone, and I wasn't really too keen on fixing it at the time. Obviously, the cost of the Wedgwood bumper is only really the cost of me not selling it to somebody else. So you could say nothing. On this same fitting extravaganza, I put on a silver front bumper, And that came from, well, another Rover 25, believe it or not. One with a bit more damage, but crucially, the bumper was much better than the original gold one that was on there. The silver front bumper times, they were good. That's when I started to really get something out of this car. I really started to enjoy it. Obviously you can see it's not a silver front bumper now, but at the time, because I'd had the front bumper off, I changed the headlamps because the old ones were a bit rough looking, and I found these MGZR lamps to be much more betterer, nicey, lovelier. Yeah, lovely. What about now? Looking to have as many different colours as I could, all standard of course. I painted the fog lamp bezels copper leaf red and Mediterranean blue. I've still got them. And then, as you can see ever so slightly here, where the bonnet lacquer had peeled, I thought I'd make a feature of it and polished it in red. Then came something a bit more ambitious. The original seats in this car were shocking. The bolster had all fallen apart and it had metal sticking through there, and it was most uncomfortable. But I didn't have a set of 3-door seats to replace them. But I did have these that came out of a 5-door. Lovely soft half leather seats that didn't fold. They didn't at the time. Those seats have been in my lockup for about a year. In fact, I tried to sell them for £30 and nobody would buy them. And eventually, well, I took them apart. I took the skins off, kept the original frames from the 3-door, put new sponges on and fixed them a bit with some glue and gaffer tape, and then put these back on. And they've been absolutely spot on ever since. Cost that £30 that I didn't get, so nothing. Then new alloys. I say new. I had a set given to me from a friend of mine called Jimmy, who is sadly no longer with us. But he gave me this set of Serpents with almost brand new tyres on for delivering him some seats. He was a very nice chap. The only thing I could do with these wheels, as they were a gift, was to keep them on my car. And I did. I'd got so much into the spirit of this car that I ended up taking it to Edinburgh on a banger race. Yes, a banger race. Well, it didn't have to be a banger. You know what a banger is? Remember what bangers were? Those cars that couldn't go down the street without farting and popping and banging because they weren't running correctly. A bit like now really, but with a lot more expense. Typically, it went from here, Edinburgh and back, no problems at all. It was around that time I started messing around with the paint, trying to get the gold bits that do exist as nice as possible. But then something great happened. It passed its MOT without any advisories. The chap in the garage next door said you should celebrate this by sticking a red bonnet on it. And you know what? That's what I did. The red bonnet came off a red car that I'd bought and then sold with a gold bonnet on it. So again, that didn't actually cost me anything. And neither did replacing the vents, because all of these were smashed. They shouldn't have been. This one in particular, all of these slats there were broken off. You know, have you seen it? People just hang stuff off them. Those air fresheners or mobile phone hangers, that kind of thing. They jam them in there, they break up the slats, and then they wonder why it didn't look very nice. How they managed to break the outer ones, I really don't know. The same actually goes for this here. When I first got this car, it was stuck there. That was stuck just there like that. And I said to the new owner, you're not going to get that much heat out of this car, unfortunately, because it is a bit stuck. However, when I got the car back about 6 months later, that knob had been snapped off. Because the usual thing of, oh, it's not turning, let's keep turning, well, just apply a bit more pressure. Have you got any pliers there we can get on there? And the inevitable happens, it's snapped off. So I replaced that and replaced the cables behind it. Bit of a faff, but had to be done. When I replaced this door originally, it was a black one, as I've said. But what I did is I stuck on the streetwise trim and I wrote the word not, just to save any confusion. The next car I bought was another silver 25. And guess what? Yes, I had a few bits off that because the engine was not worthwhile keeping. I sold the carpets to somebody else, but kept the original Rover mats. This was a 2005 car, and it also had these rather desperate, if slightly classy looking door handles. That was the first upgrade from a newer car. This silver wing that is rust free. Pity it's not scratch free though. Definitely not dirt free at the moment. The changes kept on happening. So long as I had another part that was better than the old part, I would use it. The face that you're familiar with, of course, is this arbor green front bumper, and that was given to me by my friend Damien, and Damien has since defected to Toyota, so Then came this British Racing green wing, almost entirely rust free, but with a little tiny scabby bit just there. Now this was a rather sad story actually. I went to pick up this 25 in British Racing green, and the car had been vandalised, and there's a mother and a young boy, and the boy was crying his eyes out because I was taking it away. It made me feel really rather wretched, and I promised that I would mend this car rather than taking it apart, and I broke that promise. I didn't want to, but it just didn't make any sense to actually fix it. It had a smashed windscreen, it had a noisy engine, it had a stolen catalytic converter, and it was just covered in dents. What was I supposed to do? Incidentally, that same car provided these door inserts, which are rather natty looking, and such a nice contrast with the newer bit just there. That was in a video, and in case you don't know, I found £20 behind one of those door inserts and a betting slip. Let's not forget the blue LED interior light as well. That came out of a ZR, which I sold, and then the owner scrapped it. Very disappointing. Another minor upgrade was these Rover kick plates. This car didn't have those originally. No, they didn't. I'm afraid I took those off a car called Stan and just replaced them because I wanted these ones. And to the shows Nigel went, where I first discovered the good idea of writing Project Nigel just along there with a paint pen. I did it about 3 times, it kept coming off. Now let's look at this rather dirty red door in, I think it's Rioja red. Is it? No, is it? Rio red. That is off a ZR. It was the only panel that didn't have lacquer peel. And of course, to make a deal of this, I used that panel as well. Contrast. It's interesting, it's artistic. One day, I went to a place called Sheffield, where I bought another 25. This time in red, this kind of red, and it was a lovely car, full of all the bits, the leather seats, the electric rear windows, which is a curiosity, but of course, failed head gasket. After a while of having this car in my ownership, when I discovered that yes, it definitely did have a failed head gasket, I sold it to my new friend Mick at Mad Ford Engineering, but not before swapping the wheels. These 16-inch wheels. Ooh, 16! I don't even know what they're called, but they're only found on the very latest Rover 25s. At some point I added these badges, which of course were from the older cars, before they started all that massive penny pinching stuff. Finally, this door. It's a sonic blue door from a Streetwise. Oddly enough, also supplied by my friend Dom. One day I bought this yellow ZR that was called Kev, but I named it the Custard Missile. This was another car that turned out to have a head gasket failure, and eventually I just sold it to my friend Craig, and he fixed it and then sign wrote it with Rover Revival everywhere until he got his money's worth out of it, and then sold it back to me. And that's where this yellow bonnet came from. Once I got rid of all of the stickers, I put this car up for sale. But part of the condition was I kept the bonnet, because at the time this car had a black bonnet on it with vents. Before that it had a Tahiti blue bonnet. Neither of them I felt gave me the right contrast, and I didn't like the vents anyway. So the ZR went with the black bonnet and I kept the yellow one. At some point I decided that chrome mirrors were the best thing to do. Back to that red ZR. Now I couldn't save that because it had some nasty buggered up wiring, and I never really got to the bottom of why it wouldn't work until I pulled it all apart and I realised just how messed up the wiring was. From that car came these trophy rear lamps. I decided to stick them on to see if I liked them, and they're still there, so I must do a bit. My first impressions are they're a bit chavvy, but then I found out that they were a genuine item and I thought, well, it's worthwhile trying, and for some reason they kind of suited. That particular ZR was a car that I used to find out how easy it would be to actually stick on roof bars, because obviously you've got to drill holes in the roof and I didn't want to ruin my own car, and I found out it was easy, so I did it with this as well. There we go, straight off of Dom's old Streetwise are the Streetwise bars. During that particular time I was doing all sorts with this car, and now we're going to get to one of the final parts. There was a car that I bought off of Craig called Adam. It wasn't called Adam when he had it, it was called Yab, but I called it Adam because I like to give things a name, or I certainly used to do. This was a rather nice 216. Yeah, a 216, the old bubble shape, and it was quick and it was nice to drive. But then eventually his wife wanted it back, so I sold it back, and then the cam belt broke in it, so I got it back. With a destroyed engine and a rather tatty body, I decided it wasn't really worthwhile trying to fix, so I didn't. But I did keep the carpet, and there is the carpet, which does need a vacuum again, but it is a carpet and you can vacuum it. That's one of my favourite modifications on this car. Yeah, I've got an MGTF steering wheel as well. Cost of that, you might be familiar with this, the 8-horn shouty thing. Now I made that myself from a load of horns, 8 to be exact, off of cars that are dead and they've gone, having kept the horn. So that didn't cost me anything either. This mesh grill thingy I made by myself, although it's starting to come apart again, it didn't cost me anything. So now we come to this rather interesting point. How much has this car actually cost me? Nothing. Besides the MOTs and the cost of servicing and a head gasket, nothing. It's not cost me anything. That's good news, isn't it?